Hello everyone, my name is Jane Friedman and I'm here to discuss how to improve your book descriptions, especially as it relates to Amazon and your overall audience targeting. So this session is going to look at two issues. The first is how to increase the likelihood of a conversion, which is a book sale, when someone ends up looking at your Amazon book page. So you've got a person that you have somehow appealed to, whether that's through social media or through some kind of a promotion, and they end up clicking and landing on your book page. What's the likelihood they are actually going to make that purchase or download that book? We're going to talk about that. And then we will look at how to increase the likelihood that someone will essentially stumble on your book while performing a search, whether that's a search on Amazon or somewhere else in the internet universe. The first issue we're talking about is really what's known as on-page factors. So have you optimized that sales page in order to ensure the highest number of conversions or book sales? So here are 5 on-page optimization basics. First, obviously you need a book cover image, and it should be high quality. This session isn't going to discuss how to get an ideal cover image or one that appeals to your audience, but let's assume that you have one and that it's on the page. Second, books that have look inside feature always perform better. A well thought out product description is going to dramatically affect your conversion. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. The editorial reviews, which those are the so-called professional reviews that appear before the customer reviews, and then the author bio. So all of these different components of your Amazon book page, you should do the due diligence of filling them all out completely to the best of your ability. Now, let me just talk briefly about the title. This is, of course, pretty straightforward for most authors, but make sure for that book title that you're including the subtitle and the series name if that's applicable to what you're doing. So here I have an example of The Watcher, which is part of a series called The Shining Ones, and you can see that the series and book number is in that title. The product description begins right underneath the cover, as we saw here. Right under the pricing is where the product description starts. So the best practice here is to have a headline, to make it bold, and then immediately have a paragraph break after that headline. Now, in the example I have here from my own book, Publishing 101, this is actually a full sentence that is serving as a headline. Most headlines are shorter than this. I don't always follow my own best practices, so you wanted something a little bit shorter. But what we're really after here is a bold lead-in that makes a statement that really helps sell the book. And then note what appears above the Read More button, or it's not really a button, but the text. So not everyone is going to click on Read More, and that means you want to really be thinking about what appears above that. Now, you do get up to 4,000 characters for the full-on product description on Amazon, and you should use as many of them as you can. Putting in something very short means you're just like leaving space when you could be putting so much more text in. And this is going to become relevant later on when we talk about search engine optimization more broadly. Use paragraph breaks. It is so much easier on the eye. It's easier to read and scan. It's more friendly. So be liberal with the paragraph breaks, and one sentence paragraphs are fine. And then use bold lead-ins or other formatting that Amazon offers to pull out any important sales points. So in the example here, you'll notice some of the bold lead-ins are love, love, love this book, best in the genre, J.R. Ward, meet I.T. Lucas. So don't go crazy. You don't want the whole thing bolded or like every other sentence bolded, then it loses its impact. So use it for the points that you really want to jump out at people, especially if they're skimming through. Now, I mentioned the editorial reviews appear above your actual reader or customer reviews further down the page. These are also sometimes called professional reviews. That they're the reviews that would appear in mainstream publications. If you pay for professional reviews, like from Kirkus or Midwest Book Review, those types of outlets, that's where these things go. So these, again, are part of a complete and full book description. Some authors who don't really have professional reviews will actually pull out blogger reviews or other types of customer reviews and quote them in this section, which can be fine. It's not necessarily against the rules. So at the very least, you want something appearing here rather than leaving a blank box. Some other factors that, of course, affect your success, but this isn't necessarily related to what we control on the page. Your sales ranking is going to affect your visibility and can affect your conversion. Your pricing, of course, will affect how readily people are willing to make a purchase. The availability, for instance, if you're in Kindle Unlimited or not. How fast your book ships if someone's ordering the print edition. Your overall customer reviews and ratings, of course, affect your conversion. And then there's also your Amazon author page. So if you haven't claimed this yet, you can do that through Amazon Author Central, and then you can begin filling out all of the information about you as far as your bio, what titles you've published that are available on Amazon, plugging in author updates, feeding in your blog and social media accounts. All of this, again, is very useful over the long term in generating more sales across the entire body of your work. Okay, so let's talk about the categories and keywords, and this is the area that can get a little bit technical, and I think for that reason it's intimidating, but a lot of it is really common sense, and Amazon itself gives you a lot of instruction and guidance on how to do this appropriately. For me, it's more about understanding where your book sits in the landscape, understanding your category or subgenre, understanding how readers think about your book and how they search for your book. So to clarify for those who may not be super familiar with categories and keywords, when you go to publish your book through Amazon KDP, as well as other places, you always get to choose the categories your book will appear in, and then more granular, you get keywords. So categories actually appear on your book description page. Consumers can see it, anyone can see it, see how your book has been categorized. Keywords are not visible to the naked eye. You would have to have special tools to be able to see what keywords have been set for a title, although you can usually guess at what some of those keywords are. So let's talk about the categories first. These correlate to an industry standard known as BISAC, which is set by an industry group. So these BISAC codes, are pretty much the same no matter where you go. And Amazon allows self-published authors to choose 2 categories. And if this is something you're unfamiliar with, you can get a sense of what the categories are by simply visiting Amazon and looking at the categories going down the left-hand side of the page when you're browsing books. You can also scroll to the bottom of any product page for a Kindle book and see how it's been categorized and start to think through which categories best apply to your work. Obviously, you'll see that some categories are extremely broad, like the top one here, literature and fiction, United States. And some are very specific. So we have one that gets as specific as a thriller and suspense with a conspiracy. Usually we talk about having a category that's a little more broad and then having a second category that's more specific. But generally you want something that's very accurate and very specific so that readers are getting what they expect. The worst possible thing that can happen is delivering a book in a category that does not suit the conventions or formula or expectations of that category. So categories lead to reader expectations. Always remember that, and you don't want to miscategorize your work in a way that would be disingenuous. Now, as I said, Amazon has a lot of great information about how to choose these categories, and they are going to give you some of the same advice that I just gave you. So make sure you read through that. They're trying to help you. They don't want this to be opaque. They want you to do well. Now, it's the same with the keywords. They have a lot of good information about best practices and useful keyword types. And for certain types of genres, they even have very particular keywords that they want you to use so that they can better point their readers to the right book. So like if you have a very strong female lead in a mystery, they want you to use strong female lead as one of your keywords so that your book will show up in a very particular category. And you can see this if you're browsing deeply into Amazon. You'll sometimes see those ways along the left-hand side of the screen, how people can drill down into just the type of book that they're looking for. So when you're going through this process, be a reader, be a consumer of books, and use Amazon to drill down and think through some of the choices that readers are making and how your book fits into all of the choices that they have. As you get into this process, it's almost impossible not to start thinking in terms of competitive titles and competitive authors, or at the very least, comparable titles and comparable authors. Whether you like it or not, Amazon and other sites are going to be listing your book next to other books, both bigger and smaller, trying to cross-promote and help people find the next book they want to read. Amazon in particular, as well as Goodreads, which is an Amazon property, these are really great at figuring out who and what is like you in the marketplace, and you can use this information to benefit you and to help you make better category and keyword choices. So, for instance, if you were writing legal thrillers, John Grisham, of course, would be one potential competing author that you could look at, but he's such an enormous star in the sky, it's almost more helpful to try and look at more mid-list authors and see what's going on. But you can start there if that's the most applicable comparison and start to drill down further and further. So readers who love John Grisham, who else do they read? And you can find this out with the customers who bought this also bought, and on Goodreads, readers also enjoyed X. Also on Goodreads, when you go to look at any particular book, you can see how people have shelved that book and what the names of those shelves are. So here I'm looking at Grisham's The Whistler. You can see that a lot of people have it on, their to-read shelf or currently reading shelf. But as we start to go down, we see thriller, legal thriller, crime, mystery thriller, suspense. And so there's this long tail of words that have been used to describe it. This is really valuable information because it gives us insight into how readers are thinking about these books. And they're going to, of course, do the same to your book. And you want to pay attention to how they think about it because you're trying to get more readers, marketing and targeting in a way that is going to appeal to them and speak to them. Now, there are paid tools you can use to do some of this competitive research on Amazon itself, to be able to look at any book on sale at Amazon and see what keywords are in operation, how competitive those keywords are. So that's one place you can go to as a shortcut, but you can also do a lot of this work yourself without having to really get the information overload that you're going to find in Katie Spy. I find Katie Spy a little anxiety generating. It's got a lot of information. Another tool you can think about using to help you in this process is Pronouns category analysis. Pronoun is an ebook distributor. It's similar to Smashwords or Draft to Digital if you use those services. And even if you don't distribute your books through Pronoun, you can still register at their site and let them know which books are yours, and they will start generating reports that tell you, hey, have you thought about categorizing your book in this way? If you did, you could rank higher. So this is an example of a report I got. I could be number 6 if I chose reference writing, research, and publishing guides for fiction. But sometimes you don't want to take the recommendations because you feel like it might even be misleading to people if your book were in that category. So even though I could be number 2 in genre fiction in research and publishing guides, my guide's not really focused on genre fiction. It includes genre fiction, but it's not solely about that. So I choose I've decided to choose broader categories. But this, especially when you're just starting out thinking about this, pronoun can point out some things that you may not have considered, and it can help you refine your strategy. So far we have been talking about Amazon categories and Amazon keywords, the ones that you choose in their retail universe. It's a very big universe, it's a very important universe, but it's ultimately for Amazon's purposes. There's also a bigger picture SEO keyword use that we want to be thinking about. So this is when you're thinking about keywords and phrases that will end up in your Amazon product descriptions, at your website and blog, on social media, in the content that you write. And what you'll find here is that there's always a friction between using keywords that are very popular, like legal thriller, but using keywords that are not so popular, you will never, ever, ever rank for them, at least not when you're at the beginning of your career. So for instance, it's very hard to compete as a legal thriller against John Grisham. Is there something more specific we could think about your legal thriller that would help you compete a little better? So of course, over time, as I just said, as you increase the size of your footprint and your platform grows, you will compete more and more with the broader categories. But again, this is why people often advocate having a category or choosing categories that are quite specific, so that you have a better chance of ranking in those very specific categories. Same thing applies to keyword use more broadly when we're thinking in terms of search engine optimization and how people find books, no matter where they're at online. Okay, so before we get too far into this discussion, you have to do a little bit of soul searching and consider, well, what are the topics or themes or categories or subgenres that you want to be known for? Some people switch genres a lot, or they feel kind of conflicted about the genre that they're in. There's nothing wrong with that, but that does make this exercise a little bit harder. So you get more and more out of this the more consistent and long-term you are, where you're able to make these descriptions and keywords part of your consistent and long-term branding. If you're constantly switching up, if your work is always a hopping genre, if it's always crossing genre, then you'll be going through these types of exercises again and again and again, and kind of readjusting and reshifting. Whereas, to use the example of John Grisham again, it's very consistent. Like, you always know it's going to be some kind of legal thriller when you read him. But if you don't have that kind of consistency, then you're going to find yourself kind of going through this process many different times. Okay, so now that I've made that point and warned you, let me talk about how search isn't always straightforward. So let's say you were running a service in your town to help people get rid of their garbage. And you're like, I'm offering a garbage disposal service. And while that's true, if you go and search Google for garbage disposal, you'll find that search term largely applies to the appliance, at least in the United States, and not to a service where people would actually come to your home and take away your garbage. So how would you know that? Well, you would know that by running the searches and seeing what happens. And that's kind of the bottom line that we're talking about here, seeing and understanding how people search for stuff they want. It's not rocket science. It's just a study in marketing and behavior through search. So do not be intimidated by this process. You mainly just have to be curious and studying what people are looking for and how they talk about what they're looking for. So when we think very broadly about keywords and keyword phrases, again, we're not talking Amazon specific here. We're talking more about the larger universe of how people search for books. Your first step keywords are going to be the name you publish under, your author name, your book titles, your character names, if they keep recurring throughout books, your series names. Those are like no-brainers. You're going to have pages on your site devoted to your your about page. You'll have your name on it. You'll have pages devoted to your book titles. The title of the page will be the book title. So that's simple. Like, that's really, really just make sure you do it. Put your book titles and your author name on your website and on your social media accounts. I think when it gets a little bit tougher is when we start to get into those categories and subgenres or themes in your work that you want to make sure you're consistently expressing across all the places that you're active, and then being very strategic in your use of them. With nonfiction authors, you want to think through how people search for solutions to their problems, how they go looking for information. So for instance, I work in the publishing industry. I offer a lot of information about how to get published, how to market, and there are lots of very particular questions and keywords surrounding that I know because I've been in the business a long time. But it doesn't actually do me a lot of good to use, for instance, the keyword publishing consultant, because most people who are looking for information on how to publish aren't looking for a publishing consultant. They're just typing into Google, how do I get published? So that's the important keyword phrase for me, not publishing consultant, even though publishing consultant describes what I do. Okay, so I hope that made sense. Nonfiction authors have they have to kind of flip things around even more so than novelists do, because you really have to understand how someone new to the problem is going to be searching for it. Okay, so I have an example here of an author who actually is based in the town that I work out of, Charlottesville, Virginia, Shawnee Small. If you go to the first book in her series, The Watcher, in the Shining Ones series, you'll see in her description, she calls it a new adult urban fantasy. So this is not a subcategory or a subgenre that I'm intimately familiar with. But I just as kind of a case study for this little workshop, I wanted to see what would happen if I considered new adult urban fantasy as a keyword I was using in a universal way. So the first thing I did is I just ran a Google search for it. And what really jumped out at me is that there was no link at the top here that specifically uses that phrase, new adult urban fantasy. I did get adult urban fantasy and a lot about adult urban fantasy, and you'll notice the paranormal romance. Also see that Goodreads is immediately coming up for that. And we also have a really interesting sixth result, the 10 urban fantasy series you should read. Remember that Heroes and Heartbreakers thing. We're going to kind of be referencing that a little bit later. Okay, so in any event, notice we also have this popular on the web feature at the top where we've got very specific authors and titles mentioned as associated with this keyword phrase. So for Shawnee Small, she's probably going to want to study these titles, look at any potential learnings from that, looking at how readers talk about these books, how they categorize them, and use that to inform how she talks about her work as well, assuming there's a good comparison to be made. Now, if I go to Watcher on Goodreads and look at how people are shelving her book, I notice that fantasy and paranormal romance and paranormal are, we're not talking about huge numbers here, but those are the ones that are certainly appearing before I see anything about new adult. In fact, I'm not sure I see new adult anywhere here. I do see urban fantasy one person. So again, we're looking kind of at the big picture here of how people think about this work. And right now, new adult urban fantasy is not a phrase that's being used. Of course, again, we don't have the volume of people adding the book to their shelves, which is important for this type of research, but still, it's an indicator. And as I talk about this process, notice it's kind of it's not, hard science. It's a lot of gut and a lot of triangulation of different information sources. And I actually have to give a lot of credit to Pete McCarthy for learning about some of his methods and thinking about how he triangulates lots of different sources to get a better grip on how readers think about the books that they read. Okay, so if I go back to The Watcher on Amazon and its product page, and I go to customers who bought this item also bought, and see what does Amazon say about these customers. I see urban fantasy. I see paranormal romance and urban fantasy. I see urban fantasy again. I see steampunk. So again, I'm not seeing new adult urban fantasy. The new adult term is just kind of, not surfacing. So if I here's a really killer tool. Again, this is something I learned from Pete McCarthy. If you go to Soovla.com, it's a way to search lots of different sites all at the same time without having any kind of customization of the search results. So you're not logged into these sites, but you can see what they're surfacing for people, and the search volume of certain terms. And what we're really looking for here is the popularity of terms, how people talk about certain types of books. How do they talk about them most often? So if I type in new adult urban fantasy, and particularly look over at Amazon, there's basically no volume on that phrase. There is zero volume, which is not a great sign. It's a pretty bad sign, because that means by describing the book in this way, we are never going to get any target readers to stumble on the book. There appears to be zero demand for that category of book based on this search. Now, I'm using Soovla.com in combination with a Chrome extension called Keywords Everywhere, which allows me to see the search volume of these terms. It'll also give me the dollar amount for advertising, but don't worry about that. We're really looking at how many searches per month, and for this term, it's 0. So this doesn't look like a great prospect. What if I just strip away new adult and I say urban fantasy? Well, bingo, we immediately see the numbers appear. 5,400 a month. And you can also see some other suggestions that come up in terms of urban fantasy romance, which is a much lower volume. You can see kind of out of the corner there, it's 110 a month. We've also got urban fantasy anthology, urban fantasy books, urban fantasy series for adults, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is helping us better understand our target readership and what they're looking for. They're not looking for new adult urban fantasy. They're probably looking for urban fantasy. Although this is pretty high volume, at least compared to 0, right? So what if we twist it a little bit just to get a sense of, again, is there something not as competitive that might still apply? And if we look at paranormal romance, which is a term that comes up again and again for Shawnee Small's Watcher, that's a little bit lower volume, and that may also be appropriate. But again, we need to double check this with other titles that would be competing, other authors that would be competing, make sure that we're directing people in the most appropriate way. We don't want to be deceptive in how we describe the books. We just want to make sure that we're describing them in a way that will resonate with the reader, and in a way that's going to get us new readers, not 0 new readers. Another thing that you can do, and you can do this through Soovla as well, you can just go straight to Amazon, make sure that you open up an incognito window in your browser. That means that Amazon doesn't have any information about you. You're browsing in a private way. You're not logged in. It doesn't have your history. And you can try the autofill trick, which, again, this isn't scientific. It's not going to tell you anything groundbreaking, but it will, again, help you triangulate what is it that people are really looking for. And if I type in new adult, what does come up? And interestingly, coloring books seems to be most highly connected to new adult, in addition to romance. Now, Shawnee's book is specifically in a BISAC category that's called new adult and college romance, if I remember correctly. So we do see that category coming up, which is totally what we would expect. Now, I mentioned some of this process. I have to give credit to Pete McCarthy for, basically being my guru in how all of this works. He's part of a startup called Optically, which you can check out at optic.ly, Optically. They're developing a Chrome extension. It's in beta right now. And when you use it and look specifically at your Amazon product page, it will come up with a list of suggested keywords that could potentially work not just in Amazon, but more broadly, because it's trying to look at usage of consumer terms, terms that readers use, not just in Amazon, but even more broadly. But of course, it's also going to look at how you are describing your work. And so some of the suggestions it comes up with may or may not be useful. And it's a very long list. It got cut off, you can see on the screen capture here. But once this Chrome extension comes out of its testing, I think it's also going to be very useful in pointing you in the right direction, thinking more broadly about what keywords you should be using. Another way to study how people search is to use Google Trends. And again, you have to be careful here because sometimes you're looking at very small volumes, but again, it can point you in a better direction. It can help you understand that garbage disposal is a search term for appliances and not services. Similarly, I ran a search about mothers over 40. Is this a term that if I were using it to describe a work, would it attract the people that I'm looking for? And so if you put this into Google Trends, which is free, anyone can go to Google Trends and try this with any term, you'll get a trend line, and if you scroll down the page, you'll see related searches, that's what we want to see. What are the related searches? And then you can click right on the related search. So the related search here is older mother. I can click on older mothers, and it will bring up a new trend line. And this actually has a higher volume and a more interesting trend line. And if I go below, I'll see more related searches, and I start to see some of the more specific, narrow issues related to this, like autism older mothers, pregnancy older mothers, twins older mothers. So now we're getting some really useful information about how to talk about, attract, generate content that would get me these people into my sphere of content, my books, the stuff that I produce, whether it's through my website or blog or guest posts or over at Amazon. A company that does this really well and that you can probably learn from is Open Road Media. They specialize in marketing backlist books, mainly fiction, and they have a range of sites that produce content to help capture readers who might be interested in books they have to sell. So here's an example. If we type in what to read after Game of Thrones, you'll notice that there's some content that comes up that tries to make some suggestions about that. Now, none of these suggestions are from Open Road Media, but they've done content that's similar to this that doesn't appear in the top 3 search results, at least not yet. So they have an article at their site, Early Bird Books. Notice it's not Open Road Media. They have a site called Early Bird Books that's a content-driven site, and they have an article called 10 Epic Fantasy Books Like Game of Thrones. And of course, some of those 10 epic fantasy books that they're listing are books that they sell. And they're also going to try and get you to sign up for their email newsletter so you can get information about free and discounted ebooks. So this is a lead generation tool based on getting people through search, knowing what people are searching for and feeding them content that matches it. Here's an example of a really astute editor of romance who has put together a lot of content at her site on best reads in particular categories of romance. When I did a search for best historical romance, her site was within the top 5. She's got this 15 best historical romance novels reading list. She has a lot of other similar reading lists at her site that are clearly meant to attract people when they're searching for very specific genres. Similarly, there is an author who writes romances with Vikings, and she has a piece of content that comes up in search results. And here's the Heroes and Heartbreakers again. This is actually, if you see Ships Ahoy, the thing that outranks Crystal Jordan right there. Heroes and Heartbreakers is a content-driven site by one of the big 5 publishers. I've now forgotten which one, but it's similar to Open Road Media's initiative where they're building out content of interest to people who have very particular genre cravings that they're continually trying to feed, usually through a variety of media, not just books. These sites might even be looking at film, TV, and other forms of pop culture. So again, this is a way to generate interest in one's work based on people's just use of Google to find out what to do next on virtually every topic. There's so much more here that you could play around with. Again, it's about being curious about how readers think, how they search, and then making sure that you describe your work in a way that matches their expectations. So Pete McCarthy, as I've mentioned, has so much to share on this topic. You can look at one of his presentations at slideshare.net. Look for the user called Logical Marketing. He did a really great presentation about all of his audience research tools that I think you'll really enjoy. And if you enjoyed this presentation and would like to stay current on all of the things that affect your success in the business of publishing, you might be interested in my newsletter, The Hot Sheet. It comes out every 2 weeks via email. You can learn more about it at hotsheetpub.com. And for those of you who've gotten to the end of this presentation, you can get 15% off an annual subscription with the code LBF15, and that'll be good through March 24th. Thank you so much for joining me, and good luck with your categories and with your keywording.